Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Westside Congregation. May you find warmth and inspiration here. Our topic today is spirituality. It comes from Principle 7, which is respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And our source is the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. I'm Sherry Nofke, your service associate this morning, and our presenter is the Reverend Julia Van Ketchen. So for our chalice lighting, the stream of life that runs through my veins night and day runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the dust of the earth in numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and of death, in ebb and in flow. I feel my limbs are made glorious by the touch of this world of life, and my pride is from the life throb of ages dancing in my blood this moment. And we also light a red candle to symbolize our quest for racial justice. And we'll repeat our affirmation. Life is a gift. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Our animal ministry moment, we have two stories. This first one is about an octopus. The octopus shakes the rescuer's hand. An Egyptian couple found an octopus stranded on a beach and decided to move it back to deeper waters. It looked near death, and they were worried about their new friend. So they went back to check on it the next day, only to discover it was alive and well. Perhaps the octopus had been looking for them too, because for the next hour it followed them along the beach, occasionally reaching out a tentacle to shake hands, or high one. After appropriately thanking its rescuers, it headed back out to sea. And we also have a story about the giant rat who wins the Medal of Honor.
When British charity PDSA announced the winner of its gold medal, its top civilian award, people were surprised, but mostly because the winner was not a person at all, but a giant African pouched rat. Magawa was awarded the high honor for his diligent work seeking out unexploded landmines in Cambodia. The nearly 3-pound rat was presented with a tiny gold medal and commended for his life-saving bravery and devotion after discovering 39 landmines and 28 items of unexploded ordnance in the past 7 years. They also noted that when Magawa was not saving lives, he enjoys snacking on peanuts and bananas and napping. So I have, by invitation, 2 weeks to talk about spirituality. As you probably would guess, since I became a minister and spent years and years in school and training, it's a big question that I live with. Everything else in my life is actually in reference to these questions of meaning and belonging. I call it all a spiritual longing. I think my sense of what I call spirit grew from something that I've experienced since I was a child. It's elusive, and really, I can't do it justice in language, but it leads me to be curious about the nature of reality and how we know what we know. And then the next step, knowing that we human beings are so limited in our capacities, how do we make choices about how we're going to live? What do we, as human beings, use to understand what's beyond our own senses? I accept that there is something like an order behind my limited understanding, and I don't think it's possible to grasp it in language, though people in every age have certainly tried. For me, in spite of it being so elusive, it is a major part of who I am and how I see myself. As humans, our perception of so many things is limited. We already know that animals, just for one example, see different ranges of colors than we do. Some see infrared, just as an example. What we hear is some of the sounds around us, only certain narrow band of frequencies. And that's just two observations about our limitations. So how, with all of this, do we know what reality can be? Please play with the idea that what we believe about this world is first of all limited by our physical equipment, and then ask, how did that shape our beliefs? It's hard to guess, maybe impossible, but nevertheless, with our limited equipment and finite lives, we create models for what reality is and what it is to be alive, and here on this planet. And then from those ideas, we create rules for behavior. Out of all this swirl of observations and theories, that all of you listening to me today, our tribe of seekers, honor the importance of being responsible to the earth and to one another. Scientists know so much, but it takes philosophers to ponder what it all might mean and guess how we fit in. Throughout history, as we've wrestled with these questions, we created stories, and these stories formed moral notions about responsibility and how we should navigate this life and all of its beauty and grandeur and ambiguity and horror and loss. We, each of us, use all of these bits and pieces and platforms and layers of experience and all the stories we've ever heard, and we make up rules for how we're going to live. We have more experiences. And some of those experiences are so emotionally rich or maybe even wondrous that some of us use the word spiritual. They seem to surpass what we already know and maybe can know through science. We pick up a few strands out of this huge immensity and we try to make sense of where we find ourselves. We notice our living and try to imagine why. Why anything? And so what? As we play with these thoughts and these experiences, these threads, and try to imagine what it all is on a scale we can grasp, from that, if we are thoughtful people who ruminate about such mysteries, we then make rules for how we're going to live. So, I find myself here alive and full of questions, unanswerable questions, and I find myself also with wonder and a sense of responsibility. Here's one of my examples of an experience that makes me feel awe. And from awe come all those kinds of questions about where I fit into the unknown. I hope each of us has walked out on a moonlit night and seen something that reminds us that we are part of a mystery so huge we really don't have language. Maybe recently you stood out and saw the space station go overhead. It's passed over Rio Rancho several times recently, and I was awed. Astonished, really. We send people into space. They live there for months and maybe bring back another tiny part of this great mystery we find ourselves in. Watching the space station orbit above my head, I remembered, of course, the time we went to the moon. We had Voyagers leave the planet, arrive at the moon, and walk on it. The whole endeavor was reaching beyond what we knew. Developing technology for such a feat requires challenging all kinds of barriers, including our notions about what's real. Remember that when Magellan sailed away, folks commonly thought he would fall off the earth. That was only 500 years. Imagine 500 years from now what we may have discovered. So, standing there in my yard, not knowing what I don't know and trying to live conscientiously, I looked up at the stars and that space station. Let me pose another opening question on spirituality if we want to talk about the meaning of life or moral philosophy. Is our place in this emergence just random? And this is really the heart of my two sermons, how does my answer to that question, or lack of an answer, matter to how I'm going to live? If I wrestle with ideas like this and try to figure out what it means to be me, I call that spiritual work. I'm despair of ever having an absolute, definitive, coherent answer, and I'm not willing to live by what somebody else tells me. That's one of the reasons I'm a Unitarian. Knowing that I don't have absolute answers, I have to stand somewhere and figure out some guidepost and keep my mind and heart open along this journey. The questions that have always haunted me and made my brain itch propelled me to look at various cultural answers that might point to some why that I can hold on to. I find myself here with this kind of consciousness. And now what? How did it come to be that I'm here with some capacity to think and hear and question and remember, although, as you know, my memory is not always that good? Is there meaning behind it all? Because I can think, do I bear a certain kind of responsibility? Why anything? And most particularly, why me? I know I won't have a satisfactory answer all written down, but there is something in the grandeur of this earth and our lives that evokes a feeling in me that I can call reverence. A sense that our lives are part of something, and therefore we really should use them well. Then the challenge is to figure out what that means, living well. I wonder what your responses are to these ultimately unsolvable mysteries. Mine begins with awe and something other than an intellectual answer. And it's this other layer that often I refer to as the mystery that sparks wonder and reverence and spirituality. And I have from time to time had a whiff of feeling connected to the energy of everything. Language is really inadequate and so clumsy for such an experience. I've heard it called oceanic. By the way, the couple of times I've had a small taste of such an experience, I was out by myself in the woods at night. It was sort of kind of like feeling that as minuscule as I am part of it all. Me. I belong. And of course, you do too. We are here and alive, and we decide how we're going to live. And we look for some guideposts along the way toward what we commonly call a moral life. Unless you simply accept someone else's answers, the only way forward is to keep paying attention. And it's this paying careful attention that I mean when I refer to spiritual work. Spirit, in my language, is that ineffable something that caused us to be here at all with all of our curiosity, and that fuzzy sense that somehow my engagement with all of this matters. So, when Fanny and I moved here, we bought a house that sits on a hill and faces Sandia Mountain. I spend a lot of time looking at that mountain. It completely dominates the horizon, and when I pay attention, its very presence makes me feel something. And I find myself surprisingly quoting a line from the Bible as I look at it. My home is in the mountain, from whence cometh my help. Now, I'm not a person who typically finds solace in the Bible. I didn't read it as a holy book to find answers to the kinds of questions that I wrestle with, but it does tell me about the yearning that other human beings for at least 5,000, 6,000 years have brought to this quest for meaning. So, when Reverend Nancy invited me to develop 2 conversations about spirituality, I found I wanted to put into words something about how I find meaning within this mystery. It's my experience, having been at this for 76 years, that I'm going to fail. Why is there something instead of nothing? Beats me. But I can talk about what I believe so far and invite you to examine your responses. And we, as Unitarian Universalists, offer generous listening to one another as we wrestle with these ideas. And in the face of never knowing, we offer consolation to one another. Another way to name this seeking is to keep asking, what matters? Well, most fundamentally, I believe bearing witness matters. By witnessing, I mean that when someone we love is hurting, we might go to them and say, I see you're hurting, and I brought you soup. But it's the showing up that really matters, that bearing witness. I see you. To feel witnessed matters because it helps us to feel less alone. If someone says, I see you, we feel the connection, and maybe we get to complain a little, which sometimes helps a bit, or sometimes in some way it brings our attention to a new way of understanding, or occasionally we mutually discover some way to address the hurt. The sharing, though, the sharing itself with people who care about us changes the experience of hurting, even if nothing changes. So showing up for one another is a big part of what I call a spiritual journey. There is magic in being attentive to one another. I can say a few more superficial things. My experience is that the asking of questions finally comes down to the familiar question, so how are we going to treat one another and this earth? The way we strive to learn and improve ourselves and enjoy this world and all of its beauty and all of its heartbreak, all of it is part of being a human being, and even on this practical here and now level of experience, there are mysteries that I call spiritual. So when I walked out recently on that moonlit night and saw a conjunction of 2 planets in space, I felt stirred. Space, they tell me, goes on forever. What does that mean? And if it doesn't, what's at the edge? Out of my responses to all those questions that I find spiritual, I'm haunted with the why. How did it happen that I am here, and what next? You see, I want things to have meaning. And I want my life to fit into some grander pattern, some kind of evolution. Don't you think that's why religion developed at all? To assuage that longing. So I study and I learn a little bit about brain functions and electrical currents and the way different lobes of our brain handle different tasks. But I'm still left with that, why is there something instead of nothing? And are we merely random accidents? Only something that happens when energy gets routed and more energy comes and strikes, and there's life and time and emergence, and finally we slither up on land. Quite rarely, when I'm under the stars, I have a whiff of experience that's not intellectual and a sense of belonging. Spiritual practice is setting the stage for something like that to happen. So I invite you to keep looking at that mountain, not in a hurried way, but look until you are really attentive. Maybe sometimes, perhaps just from familiarity, or maybe perhaps something else, you might feel an emotional connection. Here I am myself just pointing at that mountain and hoping you will look up. But here are a few words from writers who are, I think, looking at their mountain. First, a few words by D.H. Lawrence. When we get out of the glass bottles of our ego, and when we escape like squirrels turning the cages of our personality and get into the forest again, we shall shiver with cold and fright, but things will happen to us so that we do not know ourselves. Cool, unlying life will rush in, and passion will make our bodies taut with power. We shall stamp our feet with that new power. Reading that, I know I'm not alone in my feelings and questions and longing. And here are a few words from Nancy Wood, who says everything I said in this whole sermon in about a paragraph. My help is in the mountain where I take myself to heal these earthly wounds that people give me. I find a rock with sun on it, and a stream where the water runs gentle, and the trees which one by one give me company. So must I stay for a long time, until I have grown from the rock, and the stream is running through me, and I cannot tell myself from one tall tree. Then I know that nothing touches me nor makes me run away. My help is in the mountain, and I take that away with me. Earth, cure me. Earth, receive my woe. Rock, strengthen me. Rock, receive my weakness. Rain, wash my sadness away. Receive my doubt. Sun, make sweet my song. Sun, receive the anger from my heart. I hope all of us have had the kind of experiences these writers are talking about, and I know I want more of. So let's continue this conversation next week. Blessed be.
So as we extinguish our chalice, I'm going to read this paragraph from Charlotte's Web that summarizes everything Julia just said, and I'm going to read it because when Julia reads it, she cries. So, life in the barn was very good, night and day, winter and summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days. It was the best place to be, thought Wilbur, this warm, delicious cellar with the garrulous geese, the changing season, the heat of the sun, the passage of swallows, the nearness of rats, the sameness of sheep, the love of spiders, the smell of manure, and the glory of everything.